And senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, Jamie Metzl, joins me now for more on this. Jamie, thanks for being on. So the U.S. is adding new restrictions for travelers from China as China is finally easing its restrictions for outside travelers. So how is this expected to impact U.S.-China relations?
Well, U.S.-China relations are already in a very bad and deteriorating state. In addition to everything that's happening in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, and in many other areas, China is now experiencing a terrible wave of COVID-19, just like we've had. And the lack of transparency among Chinese authorities is the real problem. Our heart goes out to the people of China who are suffering, just like we suffered in the past, and we should do everything possible to help them if we can. But there is basically zero transparency coming out of the Chinese government. Now we have maybe up to a quarter of the population of 1.4 billion people being infected. And we're going to see a lot of variation. That could be dangerous for everyone. And we need high levels of transparency to protect the people of China and ourselves. And we're not seeing that from China. We're seeing videos of these dead bodies lining the corridors of hospitals and crematoria. And the Chinese government is saying only 7 people are dead. Very little information coming out. And so if we want to improve relations, if we want to help the people of China and help ourselves, we need much higher levels of transparency from the Chinese government.
Now, officials at the CDC say that they are deeply concerned over China's lack of transparency about the outbreak there. What information are they worried about? What could China be withholding to cause the U.S. to implement these restrictions?
Well, the most important figures are the figures about the nature and the level of the spread. So we've seen in the United States and around the world how the virus mutates over time. And understanding the nature of the virus, what are the genetic mutations, what's the level of the spread, is exactly what we're going to need in order to not just protect ourselves, but to plan for what's happening in the future. Because Chinese vaccination levels are relatively low, particularly among older adults. That means that the virus is going to evolve. It's going to find a way to infect more people. That's what viruses do. And China's really dangerous lack of transparency was connected to the beginning of the pandemic, and in many ways we might not even have a pandemic at all, but for China's lack of transparency and other steps in the early days. And now in this later stage, although China did an effective job of protecting its population in the first phase with its zero COVID policy, it never transitioned out of that like other governments, New Zealand and others did. And now China is increasing the risk to the rest of the world by its lack of transparency. In addition, China wasted the time that it had with zero COVID. It didn't build up its capacity. It didn't build up its medical capacity sufficiently. For nationalist reasons, it refused to import Western vaccines, particularly mRNA vaccines, which are much more effective than the Chinese own developed internally vaccines. So this is really a mess, and it's in the interests of the Chinese people and the world that we have much higher levels of transparency and accountability.
Meanwhile, what's the way forward for China now? The government is facing a ton of backlash over its zero COVID policy, and they're still seeing a surge there. So what now?
So for sure, China needs to be much more transparent. For sure, they need to start importing Western mRNA vaccines. And I hope this can be a wake-up call for the Chinese government. In many ways, this is a political pandemic globally and in China. We wouldn't have this pandemic but for the unique pathology of the Chinese state. And China is seeing that it may be that having one man or one party control helps you and could help you in the early phase of the pandemic when you're trying to control everything. But when effective response is based on a coordinated strategy, when it's based on governance, when it's based on the participation of people and their governments, then it's a much more challenging situation, and we need much more accountability from the Chinese government.
All right. Jamie Metzl, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.